and welcome. You're watching Left, Right and Centre with me, Sanket Upadhyay. Two stories that we are tracking over the next 60 minutes. Story number one is a very interesting development that has taken place in the United Kingdom, where Mr. Boris Johnson suddenly lost confidence of more than 60 of his MPs of his party. 6-0. Somebody in the United Kingdom did an Eknath Shinde on Mr. Boris Johnson. They all resigned, an expression of no confidence in their leader. And eventually, under great pressure and duress, Boris Johnson, the United Kingdom Prime Minister, had to resign. He did not want to because he stayed on, but he had to resign. There was no other option. But the bigger question that we are asking is, number one, who next? Number two, what is this going to mean for the United Kingdom? And number three, what this means for the relationship between India and the UK. You see, what is happening is that the name of Mr. Rishi Sunak as a front runner is being circulated, is being spoken about. Can the UK have a Prime Minister of Indian origin? And how does this necessarily change things? We'll put all of this to discussion. What brought Boris Johnson down and what next? That discussion in just a short moment. Also on the show, we'll get you an interview with Chief Scientist of the WHO, Soumya Swaminathan. She'll be speaking on a new COVID sub-variant which is spreading in India. Remember again, we all seem to have forgotten about the virus. You know, I haven't. We carry the mask even now, wear it all the time because the virus is still out there, strong and invisible. A new sub-variant which is spreading in India. All that you need to know about this sub-variant from the expert herself. That interview in just a short moment. Before we begin and introduce all our guests, let me now also introduce my colleague Maha Siddiqui. Maha, thanks very much. Would you like to put this in perspective? Mr. Boris Johnson tried very hard to stay on but couldn't manage. Imagine 60 MPs walking out on you.
Yes.
What next? Would you like to tell us a little bit about the probable Prime Minister candidates?
So one interesting choice there, and somebody that the Indian side or the Indian people would rather find very interesting is Rishi Sunak. That's because he's of Indian origin, second generation though. And the fact that Rishi Sunak gained quite a bit of popularity during the period of the pandemic, that was because of the relief package as well as the job retention scheme that he had come out. Also, he's extremely young, 41-year-old. He's had a meteoric rise in his party. Only in 2015, Sanket, did he become a member of parliament from a safe seat, but then within 3 years he became a junior minister in the local government, and then he wasn't the first choice for the chancellor. It was Javid who was the chancellor for Boris Johnson, but then when he stepped down, Rishi Sunak took over, and then during the period of the pandemic he did what he did to gain quite some bit of popularity. Also, just going by the looks and how the tabloids portray him, they call him Dishy Rishi as well. Meanwhile, of late though, Sanket, there has been one controversy with regards to him related to his wife for non-domicile tax status. That's the only one hit that one can see in the recent past. Apart from that, of course, the fact that he was supportive of Boris Johnson all along. It's only day before yesterday that really he was the second person after Javid to put down his papers quitting the cabinet really. Maybe that too could go in his support, that he took that step and he was one of the first few to take that step. So these are, this is one choice clearly that is of interest at the moment, Sanket.
Exactly. There is a long drawn process also. From what we have learnt is that any Tory leader who has the backing of at least 8 of his colleagues can throw his hat in to replace the Prime Minister. If there are more than 2 contending, then the 1922 Conservative Committee will hold a secret ballot to eliminate until there are only 2 contenders. Conservatives still have a majority government. A date will be decided to choose between 2 candidates and make an announcement. So it is a long drawn process. Actually, Maha, we were thinking that we'll have the name today, weren't we? That we will know perhaps who his replacement is going to be. but there seems to be some inner party democracy at play here.
And Sanket, also Boris Johnson making it clear that he will continue as the caretaker Prime Minister. Although, there are lots of voices on the ground, and Radhika here brought us some of those voices. People at this juncture are so frustrated with Boris Johnson that they do not want him to be in the chair of the Prime Minister for a minute longer. And we've had some light moments there as well, where we've seen this Twitter handle of the cat at 10 Downing Street, Larry the cat. And the cat has been constantly trolling the Prime Minister on Twitter, saying that he should immediately step down. So yes, what we've been seeing at the moment, Sanket, is the fact at the last minute also the possibility that Boris Johnson would have hung on to power. Those were the indications coming even an hour before the statement, which happened at 5 p.m. Indian Standard Time. There were reports coming in from the United Kingdom that there is a possibility that he might fill in the gaps of those cabinet ministers who've resigned with new faces and continue as the Prime Minister. But I think when the opposition read the Riot Act saying that they are going to bring in a no confidence motion if he decides to hang on to power anymore, I think that really gave him the indication that at the end of the day he needs to go. And if I can jog you back a bit in time, when the no confidence motion which he scraped through came, Sanket, 41% of his own party MPs did not support him in continuing as the Prime Minister. Now, even though he may have survived that no confidence, but it says something when a chunk of your MPs, 41%, are showing no confidence in you. So this was expected, but it was protracted because Boris Johnson decided that he's going to brazen it out and stay. He said that in Parliament as well yesterday, saying that these are difficult times economically for the country and therefore he's not going to run away. So he made this scene almost like he is there fighting for a cause. However, scandal after scandal made it very difficult for him to stay in the chair of the Prime Minister.
Sure. Do stay on, Maha, and be a part of this discussion also, as we'll discuss first the history, what led to this situation where many of his party members said enough is enough. We need to get this man out. In fact, some of the newspapers have been have used extremely strong words for him, calling him his downfall as the clown fall, and that just continues. Shruti Kapila is a professor of history at the University of Cambridge. Ambassador K.C. Singh, former diplomat, strategic affairs expert. Sunny Handal, he is the deputy editor of the opinion desk, Independent Voices. Viren Sharma, MP in London of the Labour Party. Nicholas is a UK journalist and a former BBC editor. And Parvez Alam, broadcaster and director, Cine Inc., London. Thank you very much, all of you, for joining us on this broadcast. Mr. Nicholas, I want to begin with you first, and perhaps if you could educate our viewers here in India, why is Mr. Boris Johnson treated within his own party and outside as an object of hate?
Well, I think that's putting it a little strong. I think I would say perhaps an object of ridicule because of the way he's been wriggling out of all the recent scandals. And indeed, there have been quite a lot of scandals. So, but let's go back. I mean, let's remember that he won the party leadership with an overwhelming vote. And he went on to follow that with an overwhelming vote nationally for Parliament, with winning 80-seat majority. So there was a point where he was held in very high esteem indeed. And a lot of that was to do with his backing of the policy to leave the European Union, the so-called Brexit. He led the Brexit revolution, if you like. What's happened since then has seen him sort of fall from grace gradually, and then it's been accelerating in the last 6 months as he's become undone by a lot of scandals. To be fair to him, you know, the pandemic, COVID, struck the nation at an early stage, and he's generally considered to have done reasonably well at that, and Britain has been one of the first to have emerged from the lockdown. But little things that he just apparently didn't take seriously, especially to do with members of the Conservative Party, what they were doing on the side. There were sexual peccadillos, but there were financial peccadillos as well. And he hasn't handled them at all well. So since the start of this year, roughly speaking, it's been one thing after another, and he's been wriggling to command their respect. And now the arithmetic has just gone the other way. As you indicated, he won a reasonable majority last month in the vote of, do you have vote of confidence in your Prime Minister? And this was only the Conservatives, of course, who could vote. And he won that, and that looked like a reprieve for another year, but it's just gone on and on. And really, this was the last straw, last week's scandal, and the fact that he kept denying what knowledge he had about this in the past, when it became crystal clear that he had appointed a senior figure to a senior position, a junior figure to a senior position, despite knowing quite a lot about that chap's private life. And that's really what's brought Boris Johnson down. And it's quite incredible. I mean, you talk about 60 MPs having resigned. What you're talking about is 60 people on the government payroll, 60 ministers having resigned. And if you add that to the numbers who voted no confidence in him last month, you have well over half the Parliamentary Conservative Party who have no confidence in the Prime Minister. And having said that, now we're looking ahead to 2 months with the same Prime Minister in position, and more than half the members of Parliament of his party have no confidence in him. That's a pretty curious position to be in, to put it mildly.
Very curious position. Viren Sharma, how do you look at these developments? And, you know, I want to ask you the all-important question, who next?
It's very difficult for me to say who is next, because I'm not part of that political party. But there will, in my view, they will play the card of a woman in the front runner, because that will be the political mileage they will take out of that. And they need to have the safe pair of hands, and that's where the mainly two women who are, in my view, front runner, they will not go for those people who for many years has stuck to Boris Johnson and followed those policies without any opposition to that. It's a last minute change of mind. I don't think that will give them any credibility. So in my view, that maybe Liz Truss and Penny Mordaunt, they will be the front runner.
All right. You know, Sunny Andal, I want to ask you, in that case, as he's suggesting that they might want to have a woman as a leader now, does it appear then that Rishi Sunak and all the work that he did during the pandemic, also the meteoric rise that he's seen in his party, all that will come to naught? He will not be able to replace him?
Not strictly true. I mean, there was a poll this morning saying that Rishi Sunak was the most popular leader amongst voters. So, you know, right now, in many ways, he is still the front runner. He's got very wide name recognition. You know, he's seen as fiscally responsible, someone who can manage the country's finances, and someone who is seen as a serious figure. You know, the only problem against Rishi Sunak is that there was a recent scandal about his wife's status, financial status. And, you know, there are lots of questions around whether Rishi Sunak, who's very wealthy, really understands the pain that a lot of ordinary Britons are going through, because we have very high inflation, a lot of problems. So Rishi Sunak is one. And, you know, that's not the only person of Indian origin, by the way. There's also Suella Fernandez, whose mother is Uma Fernandez from India. Sorry, Suella Braverman, whose mom, Uma Fernandez, is from India. She's also running. She yesterday declared that she was going to run. She's currently the Attorney General for the UK, the top legal minister. And, you know, she's a bit of an outside chance, but she's a very strong Brexiteer and she speaks very strongly. So there is also a chance that she could be the leader. She's, again, a woman. So she has that also going for her. The party, the Conservative Party has done better than the Labour Party, in fact, in having women leaders. So, you know, there's a lot of chance that we will have a non-white leader of the Conservative Party. Sajid Javid is going to be running soon. He's of Pakistani origin. And there is Nadeem Zahawi, who is of Iraqi origin, who's also likely to put his name forward. So the UK is going to see a very wide range of contenders, possibly as much as 10. And you never know where things will go, because actually when they vote, they don't vote for the person they like, they vote for the person they don't like to get rid of them. So, you know, there's a lot of hera-fairy going on in British politics when it comes to picking their their leaders. And the Conservative Party is very ruthless at getting rid of people they don't like.
Okay. Ambassador K.C. Singh, I want to bring you in now. How do you look at these developments and what's your reading?
Look, I think there are 2 or 3 morals to be drawn from this. One is that he came into power swept by a single issue, which was Brexit. And he had a sense of theatre, he has a degree of charisma. He used it even when he was the mayor, he'd go paddling around on his bike. Now, all that is good, but what has shown up is that if you lack moral balance, and all told, you cut these corners, then sooner or later it catches up with you. And the second thing is that it's an example for India, because we supposedly follow the Westminster form of government. They don't have an anti-defection law, but you can see how a democratic purge takes place, how you get rid of even a prime minister who has come on a big surge, because the members of parliament move against you. And here you don't have to rush MPs to a resort, fly them 2 states away, or, you know, hide them. And you can see the perils of the anti-defection law. And we've just seen what happened in Maharashtra, that you can't have straightforward, if the party didn't want the chief minister, they could have just got rid of him, rather than go through all this. So I think the distortions in the Indian system caused by the anti-defection law, we also need to rethink that this is the way to do it. If you want to get rid of someone, that's the way the party should do it. Get together, and there shouldn't be any pressures, and they just move away from a leader, and they say we need someone else. And the third one is that this is now the result of the Ukraine war, result of pandemic, economic difficulties which are facing the people. They are getting over the initial hype about Brexit, of this guy being the great guy who delinked you from Europe. So all that is gone. Ultimately, it's a question of pound and pence and the bread and butter. And on those issues, I think the last flip-flop that he did, where he increased the taxes, I think was taken amiss, and his public standing went down. And once the public standing goes down, I think the party takes a call from that. In India, unfortunately, I don't think they'll look at the public standing of a leader like Uddhav Thackeray. I doubt if Mr. Shinde was bothered about his public standing. So, you know, these are lessons for us, where if a leader is unpopular, there should be a method for the party to get rid of him, rather than just linger on and, you know, have a slow bleed for 3 years or 4 years, or just defections engineered by sundry means. So there will be a change. And final point, he's just been to India just about a month and a half ago. Now, this is what happens when there's a change of leadership, then you pick up the bits again. It'll be the same party, but it does affect whatever kind of understanding you had with him, because personal chemistry then has to restart between our prime minister and the new leader who comes in. So we'll pick up the bits again. And it's a very crucial moment for Europe because of Ukraine war, for this to be happening at this time.
Yes, political chaos certainly doesn't augur well in the UK at a time when Europe is already seeing a war in Ukraine. And as you also pointed out, between India and the United Kingdom as well, we're looking at the possibility of sealing a free trade agreement by the end of this year. Will that pace slow down because the third or fourth round of negotiations are already on? That's one aspect. But Shruti Kapila, I want to bring you in on the aspect of ethics and morality, which was raised by one of the panelists. Do you believe that really did Boris Johnson in?
I'm afraid not. I think however we got here, it has actually been a good day for British parliamentary democracy because process won over the person. And we might see a turn away from the play of big personality, which has kind of vexed mass democracies from America, Britain, and indeed India. And, Johnson was very much like other leaders, whether it's Trump or Modi, who have suborned democratic institutions for the will of their own personal authority. And you saw that with him 2 years ago when he prorogued the parliament illegally. And so I think though it was driven by a kind of mood in the party where newly elected parliamentarians were worried about holding on come the next elections, the so-called red wall in the north, but even Tory heartlands, as it happened in the by-elections 2 weeks ago. So at one level, it was just a very crass dumping of a leader who had actually won them their greatest majority since Margaret Thatcher. So it was just a kind of keeping, let's stay in power. But in the end, what has happened is that it has kind of re-empowered political process over personality. And that, I think, the question of ethics is neither here nor there, because his style, his kind of personal kind of wayward charm is, filled with less than the truth, even on Brexit, had got him into power. And that's also what has brought him down. So I don't see it's a return to ethics, but I do see a return to institutional process. Parliamentary democracy looks a bit more strengthened. The other organs of kind of parliamentary democracy, including the court and the like, will stand stronger today, despite at the moment the fact that it looks a bit weird. Is he leader? Is he in charge? Who is in charge?
Sure. Mr. Parvez Alam, you see the pound has risen as Mr. Boris Johnson quits. There will be a comparison of Britain with Boris and Britain after Boris. Would you also subscribe to the point that was being made here that party and process won over a person?
I think that's a fair point, and you talked about the power of pound going up and going down. But what I think is also a very important factor here in Britain's domestic policies is the cost of living going up. And that's the undercurrent. Commoners, ordinary people have been affected by that. And Britain is facing the highest rates of inflation since 1980s. Inflation is more than 8%, likely to hit 10%. That's the feeling here. People feel miserable when they go to the local store and then they see that some of their favorite products, the prices have gone up. So that's one point. Second thing is that, your panelists were talking about various candidates and who would be the contenders. I've got a recent YouGov poll, and this poll was conducted among the Conservative Party members, and this has appeared during the last half an hour or so. This was conducted on the 6th and 7th of July. So this is the recent one. Who could replace Boris Johnson? And this says Ben Wallace, who is the Defense Secretary and has remained a bit aloof from this, politics, but for the first time has spoken during the last couple of hours. He is a top contender, number one. And number two is Penny Mordaunt. Virendra Sharma, who is a member of parliament from Southall in Ealing, and he's from the Labour Party. He was talking about the women power. So probably she could be the dark horse. And then Rishi Sunak, number three, he is at 10%. So Ben Wallace 13%, Penny Mordaunt 12%, Rishi Sunak 10%. Liz Truss, who is the current foreign secretary, she is at 8%. Michael Gove, Dominic Raab, it goes on, and then we come to Sajid Javid at 4% and Priti Patel at 3%, and this goes downward. So that's the debate right now here, that who would be able to throw his or her hat in the ring tomorrow. And this is going to happen very soon. Who knows? Maybe in a couple of hours we are going to see some names coming up.
Okay, Nicholas, you see, does the downfall of Mr. Boris Johnson necessarily mean a mood against the Conservatives in the country? Or are these two totally different things? That the party is trying to save itself and disassociate itself from this man called Boris Johnson. By the way, this happens in India a lot. Leaders say something and then the party disassociates itself as if it really works.
Yes. Well, I think the writing on the wall, apart from the various scandals, the writing on the wall was the by-election results about 3 weeks ago, in which the Conservative lost 2 seats, which they had previously held. One of them, they previously had a 25,000 vote majority. And that really showed Conservative MPs that if there were to be a general election tomorrow or within the next month or so, the party would lose massively. And that, of course, means that many of those currently sitting in Parliament would be out of a job. So ultimately, it's, jobs for the boys. And it became very clear that Boris Johnson would not lead the Conservative Party to victory once more. He would lead them to defeat if he stayed in power. So, yes, this is the connection.
So, Mr. Nicholas, would you then say that this is more of the party's course correction ahead of a possible defeat, or an actual resentment against Mr. Boris Johnson for his personality, for his action?
Both. Well, I think it's both, but I think the latter is the more relevant one. It's party members who brought down Boris Johnson. It's not the opposition. It's not the Labour Party or the Liberal Dems or the Scottish Nationalists. This is a defeat for Boris Johnson from within his party, within his supporters. And the members of Parliament who, you could say, defected, it's not technically a defection, but they demonstrated their lack of confidence in the Prime Minister. They are acutely conscious of the mood amongst the people in their constituencies. And, every night we watch on television as our reporters report from different constituencies, and it is quite clear that the mood of the nation is very strongly against Boris Johnson. Now, if that's the case, Conservatives are going to lose the next election. So something had to happen, as you determined, course correction. So members basically pulled Boris Johnson down because they're thinking about the prospects of the Conservatives remaining in office in the next election. So the two are closely related. So we can call this essentially an internal Conservative Party rebellion, but at the wider level, it's looking at the national mood. And the national mood, frankly, seems to be very, very fed up with Boris Johnson and the government he leads.
Right. Maha,
yes.
Would you have a question for Mr.
Yes.
Sharma? Yeah.
I want to ask Sunny Handel again, because he had given us, an insight into the other possible candidates as well. But the point here is that on the ground, and our reporter on the ground, Radhika Iyer, spoke with some of the general public. At this point, they seem absolutely alienated, as it appeared, from the political class. Is it primarily because of the economic woes which was being explained by Parvez Alam that the common man is facing in the UK?
I'd say so, yeah. The fact is that people in the UK feel that they are not doing very well, and they're not happy with the fact that Westminster seems entirely just mired in infighting. Yes. At the same time, the UK has had a lot of elections and a lot of referendums in the last few years. It's been very chaotic, the entire political system. We had an election in 2015, a referendum in 2016, another election 2017, another election 2019, and now another election in 2022, 2019 and then 2022. So basically, people are getting quite annoyed with the fact that, Brexit isn't going very well. They're getting annoyed by the fact that, constantly Conservative Party MPs and other MPs, leaders, are getting fighting over Brexit all the time, and that the whole political system, in fact, just seems paralyzed, and they're constantly fighting with each other. And I think that's creating a lot of alienation, and it'll be very difficult for the next leader to really pull the party out of this hole and lead them to victory at the next general election. Because you have to remember, in fact, every single Conservative Party leader of the last almost 30-40 years has been decapitated over Europe, basically. Margaret Thatcher, John Major, David Cameron, every single one of them lost because there was some fight over Europe, and that continues. And if it continues into the next election, then people will get fed up of the Conservatives constantly fighting with each other and not governing the country properly.
All right, let me take the next question to Mr. Sharma. Mr. Sharma, you represent the lovely and colorful South Hall. I want to ask you, what's really the reaction and the mood among the Indians there as far as this change is concerned? What were their thoughts about Mr. Boris Johnson?
It's a mixed feelings. I will definitely speak on the line that Boris Johnson, people are happy. If you come to my constituency, people are happy that this is a time he should have gone. As Pervez Alam has indicated and others indicated, that the issues facing the country are not only relevant to conservative parties, affecting most of the people in the country. That's where people are happy that he is gone. But Sunny has raised few points which I personally feel that the Conservatives will not think now. They will be thinking on the next election. They will be having how they can have more damage limitations. Boris has damaged the party so big that they know that they won't be able to come back, but they're trying to save some seats, and they will be looking at the next leader who is more independent, fresh from the previous ideas, fresh from those who promoted the previous ideas and the policies of the Conservative government. In my view, that's why they will bring a new face who will be seen as more close to the public, seen as whether they will be or not.
When's the next UK elections, Mark? 25, right? 2025?
It depends now. If once he has resigned,
Yeah.
now there will be a new leader. Once the new leader is appointed, they will definitely go back to have the public mandate. So it means it could be early next year and middle of next year. Normally it should be 24 December.
Okay, so Pervez Alam wanted to come in. Shruti Kapil, I'll come back to you. Pervez Alam, do you think that's the strategy? That get in a change in command, and before the new people do what they have to, quickly offer to the people that, look, we have changed. We've gotten rid of the man you did not like, and let's go for fresh elections. Because otherwise, as you said, the elections are due, what, in January 25?
That's right, yes.
December 24.
So, I say, that's a fair analysis by Mr. Virendra Sharma, and he's a torchbearer of Pyara Singh Khabra, and then has already completed probably his 5th term as a member of parliament. But with great respect to him, I have to add another element here, and I'm not a great admirer of Boris Johnson, but then he was popular among the people of Indian origin, and that's my feeling, that's my understanding, number one. Number two, I have also noticed the migration of the Indian voter, or rather say people of Indian origin, from the Labour Party, that was their traditional, stronghold, from the Labour Party to the Conservative Party. And that's quite obvious as far as I understand. It's great. Mr. Virendra Sharma has been winning his constituency, and that's absolutely Labour. No doubt about it. But then Boris Johnson was quite popular among the people of Indian origin. And, there was another reason earlier. He was married to a woman who was a daughter of Charles Wheeler and Deep Singh. and Deep Singh was a Sikh woman, and Marina Avila was a Sikh historian. She has a commendable person and barrister, and she has written a couple of books. She really enjoyed huge popularity particularly among the Sikhs in the United Kingdom. So that's the past. Boris Johnson, colorful, mixing up with Indians and talking about various Indian things. So that was his past. Anyway, he's gone. Now, obviously, this Indian vote, and this is important for you and for the viewers of your channel, are interested in this election. Because, as I said, some of them, I'm not going to say most of them, some of them, I don't want to make Mr. Sharma unhappy here, have migrated to the Conservative Party. And they're very powerful people, they're rich people.
Okay.
So they would be interested in the Indian angle.
All right. There's another Indian angle, and Ambassador KC Singh, I want to bring you in over here. This is with regards to the trade deal that we were talking about, which India and UK are at the moment negotiating. Could there be any hiccups now if there's change in leadership? And do you think that even a new leader would want to push it quickly? Because that would be one big takeaway after Brexit, to show that we've sealed a trade deal with another country.
You see, one of the things Mr. Boris Johnson said today in his exit speech, he said there are many things which I had, part of my agenda, which remains unfinished. You see, Britain was essentially in transition. He won the mandate on the basis of delinking Britain from Europe.
Yes.
Till then, initially you could blame Europe, you could blame Brussels, saying it had limited the strategic and economic space which Britain had. Now, if you sell that dream to the people of Britain, that by delinking from Europe, Britain will be able to somehow go back to its old greatness and reach out to other countries. So he was building bridges to India, he was building bridges to China. He's got into a security arrangement with Australia and US, AUKUS, back in the Indo-Pacific. So he was trying to give this impression of Britain somehow becoming this great Britain again, reaching out with having a global reach, reaching out to new markets, and having a renewed relationship with the US. So when Britain is halfway through this, you get the pandemic and you get the Ukraine war. So some of the transition which he was planning just could not be done. So price rise, other things have caught up with him. So it's not that his vision was flawed. It's not that he probably could have delivered. But I think as it very often happens with politics, geopolitics or your environment changes. And that starts affecting your politics. And I think he's been caught in the middle of this, and on top of that, the peccadilloes of his party and his essentially, his own mistakes when during the lockdown going for a party, things like that. He got away with those in the past. But I think he forgot he's now Prime Minister. He's Prime Minister of a country which is in transition, and there are great challenges. So it required a degree of seriousness, of moral soundness, which he always lacked. It was never going to be. He was withdrawn by a British newspaper from reporting from Brussels on the EU because he used to cook up stories. Many of the quotes that he had could not be traced to people. So Boris Johnson has had that past, but he lived with it. But then it's a glass house. The higher you go up, when you're climbing the Mount Everest, rarer is the oxygen there. One little flaw and that's it. And you collapse. And I think he reached an upper limit beyond which I think these flaws and the geopolitical changes caught him.
Sure.
Okay.
Okay, thank you very much. One thing that many Indians always wonder about Mr. Boris Johnson, why doesn't he comb his hair? Maybe he'll have some time to do that. Thank you very much for joining us. We're stopping for a short break at this moment. Before we head into a break, some comments on the Coup app. Shweta says his resignation was inevitable. Atul Kumar says the crisis comes as Britain is facing the tightest squeeze on their finances in decades. Prasida Menon says management and leadership can an Indian origin become the next Prime Minister? Interesting thought. Let's see what happens in UK's politics. All right, short break. Up next, the virus is still out there, strong and invisible. We speak to the WHO chief scientist, Soumya Swaminathan. Stay with us. Okay, so as we've been saying, the virus is still out there, strong and invisible. It seems that many of us have forgotten about it. But this recent uptick in the cases has caused considerable concern. there is concern over a new variant, a new sub-variant, and a lot of questions. Trust me, you need to ask these questions. Whether the existing vaccines work or not, whether you should get boosted sooner or later, whether you should get reboosted, that is also a question. And to answer all these questions, we have the World Health Organization's Chief Scientist, Soumya Swaminathan. Thank you very much. My first question, what can you tell us about this new sub-variant?
Yes, thank you, Sanket. As you know, from November of 2021, we have had Omicron as the variant of concern, and we've been tracking that ever since. And thanks to a lot of real-time data that countries are uploading, we've been able to see the further evolution of Omicron. And as you know, we have a number of now sub-lineages, or you can say they are like daughter variants, which arise from the original Omicron, but have been considered as being part of the same family. And they've been given names like BA.1, BA.2, BA.3, BA.4, and BA.5, and so on. Now, when we saw the wave in India starting in December and January till February, it was mainly the BA.2 and some BA.1 that was circulating in India. And then subsequently, when we've been looking at what's happening around the world, we saw the emergence of two more sublineages, BA.4 and .5 in South Africa, but also in Portugal. And now BA.5 is a predominant variant across the world. I think it accounts for over 50% of sequences in GISAID and is the predominant one certainly in Europe. And the next is BA.4. In India, the BA.2 has further evolved. And so what we're calling now as BA 2.75 is an evolution from BA.2, and it has some interesting mutations on the spike protein. And you see what this virus is doing is it's trying to stay one step ahead of us. And every time it is evolving and changing to become a little more transmissible and also to evade our immunity, our immune responses, which most of us now have thanks to vaccination and also natural infection. So even people who were previously infected with any of the other variants, including BA.1, can still get infected with the new variant. And also what happens is over a period of 4 to 6 months, our immunity also tends to wane a little bit, at least in terms of antibodies. And so a new variant is able to infect or reinfect people because it's able to overcome the existing antibody levels. But having said all of this, what is very important to note is that the vaccines are still protecting us against severe disease.
Oh, wow.
So all of the vaccines that are being used around the world are holding up extremely well so far, despite the fact that the virus keeps trying to evade that immunity. And it's able to cause infection, but it's not able to progress to severe disease in the majority of cases. But again, having said that, we know that people are getting ill, and particularly people who have underlying conditions or risk factors. Many of them are ending up in the ICU, and unfortunately some people are still dying. I've just heard about 2 of my close colleagues, doctors, who passed away due to COVID in the last 2 days, but both had underlying conditions.
Dr. Swaminathan, while you've very elaborately answered what this new subvariant is all about, but as a layman, there is a very pointed and pertinent question, that is how devastating this variant is going to be. And I'll tell you why I ask you this question, because we saw the second wave and it was horrible, devastating. But the third wave was, for use of a better word, kinder. So how is this going to be? What's the study? What does the study say?
Yes, it's a very good question. And the reason the third wave was much kinder than the second wave was because of the vaccine coverage in the country, which was already pretty high by November. And that's an incredible accomplishment for India to have vaccinated, a large proportion of the adult population. Now, hopefully that will continue to protect us. So what we call that wall of immunity, which is vaccination plus some exposure to previous infections, should continue to protect us. So I don't expect that this variant will cause a deadly wave. Certainly BA4 and 5 cases have gone up tremendously in many countries. It's not translating into ICU admissions and death. So I think the important thing to track today is what is happening in hospitals and ICUs and in terms of death reporting, and to really look at the data on the people who are dying to see who were they, what was the age group, were they vaccinated, how many doses did they have. I think data like that would be very useful for the government to make future policies, particularly on boosters. But one other point is that looking at the number of genome sequences that are being submitted from India today, the numbers have drastically gone down over the last few months. So it's very difficult to track and to understand what's going on as far as the epidemiology is concerned. So again, it would be very good if the same amount of sequencing is done in all states. Today you see data mostly coming from a handful of states. And if that continues for some more period of time, because that's how we have visibility on what this virus is doing, because at any time it could mutate into a more virulent virus. Just because it hasn't done that so far doesn't mean that the next variant could not be more deadly. So we need to keep our eyes on it.
Important point. Now, Dr. Swaminathan, though you mentioned it in your first reply that existing vaccines are holding up well, but what sort of strategy change should countries adopt, particularly India, in light of these new subvariants? I mean, we've recently changed the time period of the second dose and the booster dose, but what do you recommend?
So I mentioned earlier about the wonderful vaccination program that India carried out, and I think well over 90% of adults are vaccinated, and over 900 million Indians have received a primary course of vaccination, which is just an incredible feat to be proud of. However, when you look at the booster doses or the third dose, I think the figure is just around 45 million people or so. And even in the high-risk groups, we know that people over the age of 60, people who have underlying diseases, immunocompromised, healthcare workers, these are the risk groups. Even among those groups, the booster uptake has not been very high. And we know from experience from around the world that when it comes to Omicron and this BA.2.75, you need that third dose. You need the booster dose to boost your immunity enough for the body to be able to fight this infection. And therefore, it's really important that all adults, but particularly those in the high-risk groups, should get their third dose, their booster. And this WHO advises between 4 to 6 months after the primary course. And I know that the government has now reduced the gap to 6 months from the previous 9 months. So I think it's a good time for everyone to go and get that booster dose.
Dr. Swaminathan, I've been very curious and I wanted to ask you this question. How many times should one get boosted? I'll tell you the context. Like, let me give you the example of my own parents. According to this new policy, they've already completed 6 months of their booster dose. So, what should one do? Go for a rebooster?
It's a complex question and there is no yes or no answer. And this is something which needs to be determined. And we need more data because obviously we don't have that long follow-up to know, at what intervals one needs to be boosted. Now, the WHO's SAGE committee looked at this question and came out with the recommendations. And basically, what they have said and what WHO recommends now is that a third dose, which is the first booster, is adequate for the majority of people to have sufficient, broad and long-lasting protection. However, we don't have data for people who have had this, more than 6 months previously. So there are data gaps, but for now it looks like it's protecting, for longer time. Who are the groups who are most at risk of dying if they catch COVID? They are again the same groups we mentioned earlier. So people over the age of, you can take 60 and then you take the immunocompromised. There are many people, who have severe diabetes, hypertension, mental health or neuro illnesses, genetic disorders, including children, by the way, fall into these groups of high risk. They are the people who could benefit from an additional booster. That is, we're now talking about a fourth dose. But there have been only few studies, only in a couple of countries. These studies did show some additional protection. But if you look at comparing primary dose, the first 2 doses, they give you, like, you go from 0% immunity to 80%. Then your third dose may boost you from 80 to 85, and the fourth dose may boost that a little bit further, especially in those people in whom the antibodies have fallen, the elderly and so on. So you get those incremental advances. I don't think we are at all saying that you should keep on taking doses every few months. That's certainly not the case. But a fourth dose in some countries has been used for the people who are at highest risk. It may provide some additional benefit, but we know even after fourth dose, antibodies begin to go down after 4 to 6 months. So the longer term strategy that we are looking at is a vaccine that will be more broadly protective against all variants of SARS-CoV-2, but also against all coronaviruses, if possible. So what we call a pan-coronavirus vaccine. And there's a lot of research going on, and there are some companies who are already beginning clinical trials with such vaccines. Of course, we also have now what we call variant-adapted vaccines. Some companies are coming up with a vaccine that will have both the original ancestral strain and an Omicron, could be BA.1 or BA.4 or 5. And these may actually give an advantage to broaden the immune protection. But unfortunately, very few companies and only the mRNA vaccines are moving in that direction. So we do need more research and development in this area.
All right, Dr. Swaminathan, many thanks for joining us and sharing these thoughts. Thank you so much. With that, it's a wrap in this edition of Left, Right and Centre. News continues on the other side. Good night.